Taya Williams. Thank you for joining me here on Taya's Sweet Aroma. For today's recipe, I decided that I wanted to share with you a sweet treat that is super moist, super flavorful, and that recipe is for my carrot cake. Carrot cake happens to be one of those cakes that I have had in a number of different ways. And what I mean by that is I've had it with nuts in it, although I'm not going to be adding them into this cake. I do like to decorate with the nuts. I've had them with pineapple, with raisin, and those things just really help to give the cake a bit more, like, I guess, character, some texture to it. But my recipe for a carrot cake, I like to keep it simple. I not only add grated carrot to it, I also puree part of the carrots, and what that pureed carrot does is it just adds a bit of moisture to the cake, and it allows me not to have to add in too much oil because I don't want an oily carrot cake. So that is why I like to puree some of the carrots up. And since that does have to come to room temperature before I get started making the cake, I went ahead and filmed those clips earlier. So while I finish prepping my baking pans, I'm gonna show you those clips and then we'll move on to the next step. You wanna start out by getting the carrots all prepped and ready to go. What I've done so far is I've rinsed my carrots really well. Now I'm gonna go through all of them and peel them up. All of my carrots have been peeled. What I'm doing now is I'm taking out the smaller ones because what I'm gonna be doing with a little less than half, I'm gonna be grating them on the grater. The other half, I'm gonna be dicing them down, boiling them, and turning them into a puree that I'm gonna use in the batter as well. And it actually makes it a little easier when you're using the thicker carrots to grate, and kind of less of a chance that you'll nick your fingers. So it's best to do it with the thicker ones. So move these over, and I'm gonna be using the finer grade here on the side. I've now finished grating down some of my carrots, and what I like to do is I like to measure. Once it looks around the right amount that I need, then I will stop and kind of just only grate however much more I need. And as you can see, I'm just loosely packing the carrots into this cup. Gonna get the rest of it measured. Okay, and as you can see, I'm gonna need a little bit more to finish this cup off. So I'm gonna grab one of the smaller ones until I can get this final cup measured off. Okay, this looks like it's gonna be enough. I ended up using the small one, and again, not compacting it in there really hard, just lightly pack it in, measure it off. Now for the rest of these carrots, I'm gonna go ahead and get those diced down evenly. So I've gone ahead and covered the diced carrots with some water. You want to try to get them relatively around the same size, and that way they cook up more evenly. So I'm now gonna cook them over a high heat, allow them to come to a boil, turn them down just slightly because I want them to boil and get nice and tender. And once they're there, I'll show you the next step. Okay, the carrots have had a chance to cook down and become fork tender. Now I'm gonna move them over into my blender. So you'll just wanna make sure that you strain all the liquid from the carrots before adding them into the blender. And it is better to do this while the carrots are still hot. Gonna get them all added in. Now, if you don't have a blender, you can do this also in a food processor. You can use just a regular potato masher for this. I'm gonna go ahead and puree this until it gets nice and smooth. My carrots have gotten nice and smooth, so I'm gonna go ahead and remove them from the blender into a bowl and allow them to come to room temperature before I get started making the cake. Before I finish up with this last pan, I wanted to show you what I'm doing really quickly. So I have here some butter, and all that I'm doing, or that I've been doing with the last two pans, is taking the butter, I'm just using paper towel here, making sure that I get it nicely coated all around the pan. Once it's coated evenly on the bottom and around the sides of it, I take a piece of parchment paper, which I measured out ahead of time. And what I like to do is I just get it. So I take the parchment, fold it in half. Again, and again. And then I take this little like cone shape, and from the center of my pan, I measure, and then I know where to cut. And it's best to just leave a little and then just kind of go back and forth till you get it even. Once you get your first little template made, then you can go ahead and do the same for the other two without having to measure it constantly. So I take this, place it in the bottom of the pan. Now, if you don't have any parchment paper, you can just do the butter and flour. I like to just ensure that my cake is gonna come out of the pan. So I like to have the parchment on the bottom. But if you're not using the parchment, just make sure that you're buttering the pan and flouring it really well. And it should come out for you just fine. Just taking some more of the butter to press it into the pan. Then I take a little flour, shake it around the pan, around the edges till it's coated fully. Then you just want to shake off any excess flour. So I'm going to move my pans to the back so we can go over the ingredients for the cake. Now, before we get started going over all the ingredients, I did want to mention that they're all at room temperature. In this bowl, I have some all-purpose flour, baking powder, baking soda. Now, for that flavor profile, I have some ground cinnamon, some ginger, some nutmeg, as well as some ground clove, vegetable oil. You can also substitute it for canola oil if you wanted. Some pure vanilla extract. I have my grated carrots as well as my pureed carrots, eggs, granulated sugar, dark brown sugar, and my melted butter. One thing I forgot to mention is that you want to make sure that your oven is nice and hot before you get started making the cakes. My oven has been preheating at 350 degrees. Now, to my flour mixture, which has the baking soda and baking powder, I'm now going to add in the cinnamon, nutmeg, ginger, salt, and the cloves. Give everything a whisk together. This alone, even before it is baked, it smells like the holidays. I'm gonna take my bowl now, which has the melted butter that's starting to solidify because it's kind of cold in here. I'm gonna add to this butter my vegetable oil and sugars. Give these a whisk together. So you can see here that my butter, oil, and sugars have creamed together nicely. I'm gonna start by adding 1 egg at a time, getting it fully incorporated in with this sugar mixture before I add in the next. Now for the last egg. Okay, this looks great. I want you to see how nice and creamed together everything is at this stage. I'm gonna add in my vanilla along with my carrot puree. Okay, now I'm gonna start adding in my flour mixture. I'm only gonna do half to start, and I'm moving over to, well, I'm switching from the whisk to a spatula. Now I'm gonna add in the other half of the flour. Now you can see that I still have a little of the flour hanging out in the bowl, and it is then when I like to add in the carrots. Get these folded in. Okay, now that is it. The batter is now done. Okay, now I'm gonna start trying to evenly distribute this batter into these pans. You can weigh it if you wish. I kind of like to be a bit more riskier and just eyeball it. Okay, then you just want to kind of pound them on the table really quickly. Release any air bubbles they may have in them. I'm gonna now place these pans into my oven, and I will show you what they look like when they're done. The cakes are now done. I'm gonna allow them to cool completely before placing them into the freezer. Now for the fun part, which is making this delicious caramel, cream cheese, frosting to go on this carrot cake. Before I get started though, I do want to mention that my cakes are in the freezer. I'm allowing them to get nice and firm. Since I am doing a layered version of this cake, I want them to be firm, and that way everything just goes together a lot more easier. If I were to do this while the cake was warm, then as I'm frosting it, it will stick to the cake will stick, and it just creates a big mess. So if you're doing the layered version, just make sure that your cakes have a chance to get nice and cool, slightly firm. Another thing is that I am gonna be using my homemade caramel syrup, not only in this frosting, but also on the top. And when you check out the ingredients list, you will notice that the only difference in my syrup from this sauce is that I use half the amount of the heavy cream, as well as I cook it for an extra 3 minutes. And that just gives it a bit more time to thicken up nicely for me. So if you do not want to make a homemade sauce, which I think you should, it's 10 minutes, well worth your time, then you can go ahead and just buy one from the store. Now, you will also notice I am not using any extra vanilla because it's in my sauce. I'm not using an extra little pinch of salt like I normally do with my cream cheese frosting because it's in the sauce. And the kicker, I am not using any extra butter to make this caramel cream cheese frosting because it is in my sauce. So make the sauce, and then you won't have to adjust the flavors because this recipe is based around this sauce. So I did want to point that out. I'm gonna get a bowl ready as well as my handheld mixer so I can get started making the frosting for you. Now to get started with my frosting, I've added my cream cheese into this large bowl. I'm gonna go ahead and beat them together until they're smooth. I removed 1/3 cup of the caramel sauce for decorating for later. Now I'm gonna add the remaining sauce into this bowl with the cream cheese and beat them together until everything is well combined. Now with my mixer still going, I'm gonna slowly start adding in my powdered sugar. Add in just a little, get it incorporated, then add in more until all of it has been added into the bowl. Okay, this looks great. Now, once I got all my powdered sugar incorporated in with the caramel and cream cheese mixture, I went ahead and gave the bowl a quick scrape and then beat it for another couple minutes, and take a look how beautiful. All you need is a spoon. It's nice and ready and beautiful and velvety. So I'm gonna go ahead and get the cakes out and get everything set up so I can get started layering this cake. So when it comes to decorating your cake, have fun with it. Do it how you want to do it. Decorate it how you want to decorate it. I'm just doing it how I choose to, and I'm no professional cake decorator. I mean, the flavor is going to be there. And at the end of the day, as long as the flavor is there, that's all that's going to matter at the end. I'm going to get some of this frosting into this piping bag really quick. Now, if you're not making a layered cake, then you won't need to make as much frosting. If you're doing it in like just a 9 by 13 inch pan, then make only about half of the frosting. But for sure, if you're doing some layers, then you'll want to have enough extra frosting to go between, not only between the layers, but also on the top. So I'm gonna go ahead and start getting this frosting on. I'm just gonna go all the way around in a circle. Now using my spatula, I'm just smoothing it out. I want to keep it in a nice thick layer, and that way when I cut between the cake, you'll be able to see the frosting layers between the cake. Now I'm gonna add on my next cake layer, and if you wanted to, in between these layers, like I have some toasted pecans here, I have my caramel that I'm gonna be decorating the top with. You could even put some of those things in between the layers if you wanted to. Make sure it's even. Now I'm gonna frost the top of this as well. Now for the final layer, I'm gonna add it right on top. Try to keep it as evenly as I can. Now the way that I like to start out with this cake is just making sure that I press this frosting into the sides. Now it's time for a crumb coat. And what the crumb coat does is it helps to collect some of those little bits of crumbs so that when you do your final layer of frosting on the top, they're not showing in those layers. So clean my spatula in between and just get a nice thin layer around the entire cake. Okay, now normally after a crumb coat, you want to place your cake into the fridge to allow it to chill before you do your final layer of frosting, but I don't have time for that. So I'm gonna go ahead and add the rest of my frosting on top. Clean my spatula off a little and start spreading this evenly around the cake. Okay, now that I have the top and the sides done, I'm gonna take my caramel syrup and I'm gonna start in the center, just kind of eyeballing it, and then take it out and around. Okay, and once I get to the edge, what I like to do is do like a little drip. So just go around, add a little extra every so often. Okay, that looks good. Now I'm gonna take this skewer and going from the center, let me get the pointy edge, I'm gonna pull it outward very gently, making sure I wipe between each one. Now I'm gonna take some of these toasted pecans and start putting them around the edges of the cake, up the top and down the side slightly. Okay, now that I have the edges completely done, I'm gonna go ahead, since I have a few more nuts here, and put a few more in the middle, kind of help hide that off-centered beginning that I started in the middle of it. Okay, now that is it. It is all done. Okay, now I get to cut into this beautiful cake so I can show you the inside. Try to wiggle it. Gonna try to wiggle it out as best as I can. Take a look. Trying to make sure you get a good shot of that. Deliciously moist. Check out that moistness. Well, I've already started biting away at this cake. It is so delicious. You know, the cake part of it, it's just so light and moist. It's just, tons of carrot flavor. Then you have that nice tangy but sweet frosting. The nice toasted pecans adds a really good feature. And you want to taste the cake? Okay, go ahead. It's just so delicious. You know, I always prefer making layered cakes over just the regular sheet pancakes. I think they're so much more prettier. They do take a bit more time, but it's well worth it. You can really, the spices in there and the cake don't overwhelm it. It just adds an extra little hint of flavor in the background, helps to enhance the entire cake. I could just keep talking and eating. Anyhow, I thank you for joining me here today. I hope you give this recipe a try. I hope you love it just as much as we do. As always, don't forget to like and subscribe below, and I hope to see you again next time. Bye.